What if a child sees something no one else can? What happens when innocent words reveal a terrifying secret? Stay with us. This story will leave you speechless. But first, tell us, where are you watching from? We love seeing viewers from all over the world. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories. The heavy toll of the church bells echoed through St. Michael's Church, casting a mournful shadow over everyone gathered. The air was thick with sorrow, the sound of quiet sobs blending with the solemn hymns. At the center of it all stood Evelyn, her face pale and drained, clutching her 2-year-old daughter Mila tightly in her arms. Before them lay the closed coffin of her husband, Alexander, its polished oak surface gleaming under the dim candlelight. Mila squirmed in Evelyn's embrace, her little body restless and tense. She had been crying non-stop since they entered the church, her small hands reaching out toward the coffin. "Papa, Papa," Mila sobbed, pointing her trembling finger directly at the wooden box that held her father. Evelyn's heart clenched. She bent down, trying to soothe her daughter, whispering calming words, but Mila refused to be comforted. Her wide, tear-filled eyes remained fixed on the coffin. Around them, the villagers whispered among themselves. Some shook their heads in disbelief while others watched Mila's behavior with growing unease. How could a healthy man like Alexander die so suddenly? Rumors had already begun swirling. An accident, some said, while others murmured about fate or divine punishment. Through the crowd, Sophia, an elderly neighbor known for her wisdom, approached Evelyn quietly. Her aged eyes glistened with sympathy as she placed a comforting hand on Evelyn's shoulder. "My dear, I know your heart is breaking, but Mila, are you sure she's all right?" Sophia asked, her voice gentle but filled with concern. Evelyn forced herself to glance down at her daughter. Mila was trembling, her small body shaken as she pointed not at the coffin now, but beyond it, toward the dark corner behind where the casket rested. Before Evelyn could speak, Mila let out a piercing scream that sent a chill through everyone present. Papa is trapped. He's calling for help," she cried out, her voice carrying through the church. The murmurs among the villagers turned into gasps. Several people crossed themselves, their eyes darting to the darkened corner Mila pointed at. Sophia stumbled back, covering her mouth with her hand. "God, help us. The child can see," she whispered fearfully. Evelyn's pulse quickened, her hands trembling as she held Mila tighter. "Mila, what did you just say?" she managed to ask, though her voice was barely more than a whisper. Mila sniffled, her voice shaky but determined. "Papa is there. He's calling. He's trapped, Mama." Mila kept pointing, her finger unwavering, her eyes filled with fear. A cold breeze swept through the church, making the altar candles flicker. The air grew heavier, dense with something none of them could explain. The church doors creaked open, drawing every gaze toward the entrance. In walked Victor, Alexander's cousin, dressed in a black suit. His face was unreadable, his eyes dark as they scanned the crowd until they landed on Evelyn and Mila. Victor approached with a carefully measured expression of sympathy. "Evelyn," he said, his deep voice deceptively gentle, "you must be exhausted. We're all heartbroken over Alexander's passing." He forced a smile, but there was something unsettling about it. Evelyn nodded faintly, barely able to find the strength to respond. Victor's gaze flicked to Mila, who was still clutching her mother's dress, staring at the same dark corner. "The little one. She doesn't understand. She's too young. Best not to let her speak such things. It might frighten people, he said, his tone sharp despite the feigned concern. Evelyn frowned, his words gnawing at her. She's grieving, like all of us, she replied softly. Victor sighed and his expression shifted. Evelyn, I hate to bring this up now, but Alexander, he left behind a lot of financial trouble. The house, it might be best to consider selling it to settle his debts. Evelyn froze, staring at him in disbelief. Sell the house? What are you talking about? Victor glanced away briefly before facing her again. Alexander was a good man, but he made mistakes. I'm just thinking of what's best for you and Mila. A chill settled deep within Evelyn's bones. She had never fully trusted Victor, and his words so soon, before Alexander was even laid to rest, made her stomach twist with dread. Mila whimpered, pressing closer to her mother, her eyes glistening with fresh tears. Mama, Papa is trapped, she whispered again, louder this time. Victor stiffened, his head snapping toward Mila, his face paling slightly. A hush fell over the church. Everyone had heard the child's words. Evelyn crouched down to Mila's level, forcing herself to stay calm. Mila, what do you mean, sweetheart? Mila's bottom lip trembled. Papa hasn't left. He's still here. He's calling for Mama. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, some murmuring prayers while others exchanged nervous glances. Margaret, one of the villagers, tugged on her friend's sleeve and whispered, This is not a good sign. A child so innocent wouldn't lie. Evelyn swallowed hard, squeezing Mila's little hand tightly. She looked back at Victor, whose jaw was clenched, his eyes darting around the room. Children have wild imaginations, he said with a forced chuckle. But Evelyn noticed his fists clenching at his sides. The air in the church grew heavier still, the flickering candles casting long shadows on the stone walls. Mila continued to stare at the coffin, her small body trembling. Suddenly, Sophia stepped forward, her voice trembling. There are things beyond our understanding. Sometimes children see what we cannot. Victor blinked rapidly, his face flushing. Enough of this nonsense, he snapped. Evelyn, I'm just trying to help. We should settle Alexander's affairs soon. He'd want you to move forward. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Can you leave me alone for a moment, Victor? She asked, her voice sharper now. Victor's lips thinned, but he shrugged. I'm only thinking of you and Mila. But if you're too stubborn, I might have to involve the law, he added, his voice laced with threat. Margaret gasped softly, turning to whisper to her friend, Heartless. The man's not even buried and he's already talking about assets. Victor ignored the murmurs. I'll be back tomorrow, he said curtly before turning and walking out of the church. Evelyn stared after him, her heart pounding. Something wasn't right. Victor's reaction to Mila's words, his obsession with the house, it all felt wrong. She looked down at Mila, whose innocent face was twisted with fear. Mama, Papa is still here. Evelyn's hands trembled as she held her daughter close. Mila, what do you mean? How is Papa still here? Mila hiccuped, her eyes wide. Papa is stuck. He's calling me. He's scared. A shiver ran down Evelyn's spine. The coffin, solid oak, sealed tight, sat at the center of the church, silent. And yet, she couldn't ignore the cold dread gnawing at her insides. Sophia's voice broke the silence. The child isn't lying. I've seen this before. She paused, her face haunted. Years ago, a man was thought dead, but he was in a deep coma. They buried him, but his family kept dreaming of him calling out. Evelyn's throat went dry. She turned back to the coffin, her eyes wide with growing horror. Mila whispered, "Papa is calling me, Mama." Outside, the wind howled against the stained glass windows, making the candle flames flicker violently. One by one, the candles began to dim. A few villagers exchanged anxious glances, some crossing themselves. "This is a bad omen," a woman whispered. Evelyn looked around, her mind spinning. What should she do? What if Mila was right? What if Alexander wasn't truly gone? Margaret stepped closer, her voice low but firm. "If you have even the slightest doubt, Evelyn, don't let them bury him yet." Evelyn's chest tightened painfully. She no longer knew what to believe, but one thing was certain. Something was terribly wrong. The church remained cloaked in shadows as the funeral dragged on, whispers growing louder. The villagers stared at the coffin with fearful eyes, inching away, afraid of what might come next. And in the center of it all, Evelyn held Mila tightly, her mind consumed by dread and the haunting feeling that her husband was not truly gone. The suffocating atmosphere inside St. Michael's Church refused to lift. The low hum of whispers mixed with the flickering of altar candles, casting eerie shadows against the cold stone walls. Evelyn stood frozen, her mind spiraling between grief and terror. Mila clung to her tightly, her tiny hands wrapped around her mother's dress, her eyes wide and terrified. The villagers avoided looking directly at Evelyn and Mila now, stepping back as if their mere presence was cursed. Yet Evelyn could feel every stare, every hushed murmur crawling along her skin like icy fingers. Her daughter's words still rang in her ears. "Papa is calling me. He's scared." Before Evelyn could gather herself, the church doors creaked open again. A familiar voice rang out, desperate and breathless. "Evelyn!" Turning sharply, Evelyn's heart jumped as she saw Oliver, Alexander's closest friend, striding towards her. He was pale, beads of sweat glistening on his forehead, his eyes wide with panic. "I just heard. I came as fast as I could," Oliver gasped, glancing around nervously. "There's something you need to know about Victor." Evelyn's blood turned cold. "What is it?" she asked quickly, her voice tense. Oliver lowered his voice, leaning in close. "A few days before before this happened, he told me Victor had been pressuring him hard to sell the house. Alexander refused. He said Victor had been acting strange, desperate even." Evelyn's heart pounded wildly. She remembered Victor's cold words earlier. Sell the house, settle the debts. The timing, the insistence, it was all too much. Oliver swallowed hard. And then, the next day, the accident happened. Evelyn's knees weakened. She held on to a nearby pew for support, her mind reeling. "Are you saying you think Victor had something to do with this?" "I don't have proof," Oliver admitted, "but Samuel was scared. He said if anything happened, don't trust anyone, especially Victor." Evelyn's eyes filled with fresh tears, rage burning underneath. He knew. Alexander knew something was coming. Before she could respond, Mila tugged hard at her sleeve. "Mama, Papa is crying," the little girl whimpered. The words sent a violent shudder through Evelyn. She glanced down to see Mila's face pale as snow, her lips trembling. "Mila, what did you say?" Mila pointed to the coffin, her voice barely audible. "Papa is crying. Inside." The air grew still, as if the church itself was holding its breath. All eyes turned toward the coffin, and then, like a cruel answer to Mila's words, a faint sound echoed through the church. Thud. A low, dull knock. Gasps rippled through the villagers. Some stepped back. Others clutched at their crosses or rosaries. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. It couldn't be. The sound came again. Thud. Thud. This time it was unmistakable. Several women shrieked while others covered their mouths, their faces pale with terror. Sophia, her hands trembling, made the sign of the cross. "Dear God, it's him. It's Alexander." Margaret's voice cracked as she whispered, "We need to open it. We have to." Before anyone could move, the church doors slammed open once more. Victor had returned, his face flushed, his eyes wild. "No one is touching that coffin," he barked, his voice sharp and commanding. Everyone turned toward him. Evelyn felt the fury rise within her. "You heard it, Victor. Everyone heard it. There's someone inside." Victor shook his head violently. "It's the wind. Just the wood contracting. You're letting grief turn you mad." "No wood sounds like that," Sophia hissed, her eyes full of fear. Robert, an older villager and a lifelong friend of Alexander's family, stepped forward. His voice was calm but full of authority. "Victor, if you have nothing to hide, why not open the coffin and prove it?" Victor's face paled instantly. Because it's disrespectful. You wanted to desecrate the dead because of a child's babbling?" "But what about the sounds?" Evelyn shouted back. "Explain that." Victor opened his mouth, but no words came. Instead, his fists clenched at his sides, his entire body trembling. "No one is opening that coffin," he roared again. Oliver took a bold step forward. "Then why are you so scared, Victor?" "I'm not scared," Victor snarled, but the villagers saw the sweat glistening on his brow, the tremble in his jaw. Again, the sound echoed. Thud, 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 louder this time, more desperate. The church erupted into chaos. Some villagers ran toward the doors, others then clung to the pews, paralyzed with fear. Evelyn held Mila close as tears streamed down her face. "We have to open it. I know he's in there. I feel it." "No!" Victor shrieked, but his voice cracked. Sophia stepped forward, her frail frame trembling. "Call Father Raphael. If there's a soul trapped, the priest can help him." The mention of the priest sent Victor into a frenzy. "No! No one is calling anyone! This ends now!" he yelled, his voice breaking. Evelyn had had enough. "Oliver, go! Go get Father Raphael! Now!" Victor lunged forward, but Robert grabbed his arm, holding him back with surprising strength. "Don't interfere, Victor, unless you want everyone to know you're hiding something." Victor snarled like a wild animal but couldn't break free from Robert's grip. "I swear, if you open it, you'll regret it." Oliver didn't wait another second. He bolted from the church to fetch the priest. The remaining villagers stood frozen, their eyes locked on the coffin, the sound of desperate knocking continuing. Thud, thud, thud. Evelyn held Mila, feeling her daughter's tiny heart racing. "Mama, Papa is scared," Mila whimpered. Evelyn could barely breathe, her eyes locked on the coffin. Every instinct inside her screamed the same words. Alexander is alive. The church walls seemed to close in around them, the cold air turning icy, wrapping around everyone's throats. No one could speak. No one could look away. And the knocking, it wouldn't stop. The oppressive silence inside St. Michael's Church was shattered only by the desperate thudding from the coffin. Each knock echoed like a scream through the stone walls, sending chills down every spine. Evelyn could feel her heart pounding so hard it hurt. She clutched Mila tightly, shielding her from the growing hysteria. Victor stood frozen, his eyes wide with panic, sweat dripping down his temple. "I said, no one touches that coffin," he shouted, but his voice cracked under the weight of his own fear. Mila trembled against Evelyn's chest. "Mama, Papa is calling me. He's scared. It's dark. He's cold." Her innocent words sliced through Evelyn like a blade. Sophia crossed herself repeatedly, whispering prayers as her lips trembled. "That's no spirit. That's a man trapped in his own grave." Margaret's face was pale as a sheet. She turned to Evelyn, her voice barely above a whisper. "If he's alive, there's no time left. We must open it. Now." Victor's head snapped toward her, his eyes bloodshot. "Shut up, all of you. You're letting grief make you fools." Suddenly, the church doors creaked open again. All heads turned as Oliver rushed back in, breathless, his face flushed with urgency. "Father, Raphael is on his way," he gasped. "He'll be here any minute," Victor snarled. "You should not have done that, Oliver. This is going to bring nothing but trouble." Oliver ignored him, striding quickly toward Evelyn. "Stay strong. He's coming. He'll know what to do." The thudding inside the coffin continued, relentless, agonizing. Thud, thud, thud. Sophia's eyes welled with tears. "I've seen death, child. That's not death. That's a man begging for his life." Evelyn couldn't stop trembling. She wanted to run, to scream, to tear the coffin open with her bare hands. "I can't wait," she gasped. "I can't. I need to open it." Victor lunged forward, grabbing Evelyn's arm so hard she winced. "You open that coffin, and you'll regret it for the rest of your life," he growled. Oliver reacted instantly, grabbing Victor by the collar and yanking him back. "Touch her again, and I'll end you right here," he snarled. Victor's face twisted in rage, but he stumbled back, knowing the crowd was no longer on his side. The villagers, once hesitant and frightened, were now glaring at him, suspicion burning in their eyes. Evelyn wiped her tears, her voice breaking. "Why are you so afraid, Victor? What's inside that coffin scares you more than what's out here." Before Victor could respond, the church doors slammed shut with a deafening bang. Gasps echoed through the room as the candles flickered violently, some extinguishing entirely. The room plunged into semi-darkness. What is happening?" Margaret stammered. "We're locked in," a man near the door shouted, yanking at the handles. "The doors won't budge." Panic started to spread. Some screamed, others pounded on the doors, but it was useless. The church felt like a tomb now, sealing them all inside with the truth no one wanted to face. In the middle of it all, Victor suddenly broke. His knees gave out, and he collapsed onto the cold stone floor. His face was pale, his eyes wild. "I didn't mean to. I didn't know it would go this far." Evelyn's head snapped toward him. "What did you just say?" she demanded, her voice sharp as a blade. Victor sobbed, his body shaking. "I only wanted the house, I swear. I didn't mean to kill him." The church erupted in gasps. Sophia covered her mouth with her hand, eyes wide with horror. "Dear God, what have you done?" Oliver stormed forward, towering over Victor. "Talk, now." Victor shook his head furiously. I put something in his drink, just to make him sick, just to scare him. I thought he'd change his mind about the house." "You poisoned him?" Evelyn screamed, her voice filled with rage. "I didn't mean to kill him," Victor wailed. But he wouldn't wake up. I panicked. I bribed the doctor. I forged the papers. I thought he was dead." The entire church fell into stunned silence. Sophia whispered, "You buried him alive. You monster." Victor sobbed louder. "I didn't know. I swear. I thought he was dead. Please, please." Before anyone could react, a voice called from the door. "Father Raphael is here," someone shouted. The doors groaned open, and Father Raphael stepped inside, his expression grave as he took in the terrified faces. "What is happening here?" he demanded. Oliver pointed to the coffin, his voice hard. "There's knocking from inside, and Victor just confessed. He poisoned Alexander. He forged the death certificate. He buried him alive." Father Raphael's face darkened. He strode to the coffin and placed a trembling hand on the lid. The knocking continued, clear, desperate. Thud, thud, thud. "There's no more time," Evelyn cried. "We have to open it now." Father Raphael nodded solemnly. "Do it." Evelyn, Oliver, and Robert stepped forward. Victor screamed, "No, no, you'll doom us all." No one listened. Oliver shoved Victor aside. Evelyn placed her shaking hands on the lid. "On 3, Father Raphael said quietly. 1, 2, 3. Together they heaved. The lid creaked loudly as it opened. Gasps and screams erupted as everyone stared inside. There he was, Alexander, alive. His skin was pale, his lips cracked and bleeding, his eyes barely open, but he was breathing. "Mama, Papa." Mila's small voice broke through the chaos as she reached out. Evelyn collapsed over Alexander, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm here. I'm here." Father Raphael crossed himself, his voice shaking. "A miracle. He's alive." Alexander's parched lips trembled. Evi, we're here, love," Evelyn sobbed. "We're here." Mila clung to her father's arm, tears streaming down her face. "Papa! Papa!" The villagers stood frozen, staring in disbelief at the man they were about to bury alive. Victor wailed in the corner, his cries filled with terror and guilt. Father Raphael's voice rang out, strong and furious. "Get help, now! Bring the police!" Oliver was already running, and Evelyn stayed, holding her husband, whispering over and over, "You're safe now. I've got you. I've got you." The church was no longer a place of mourning, but a scene of utter chaos. Gasps, sobs, and frantic whispers echoed against the cold stone walls. Evelyn clung to Alexander, tears streaming down her face as she cradled his weak, trembling body. His breathing was shallow, his skin ice cold, but he was alive, painfully, miraculously alive. Mila sobbed uncontrollably, her tiny hands gripping her father's pale arm. "Papa, Papa, please don't leave," she whimpered, pressing her cheek against his. Alexander's cracked lips trembled, his eyelids fluttering weakly. "Mamila," he croaked, barely audible, but the sound was enough to make Evelyn break down completely. Father Raphael knelt beside them, crossing himself quickly. "God in heaven, he lives. Truly, the Lord has spared him," he whispered, but the priest's eyes were wet with unshed tears. The villagers stood frozen, unable to process what they were witnessing. Margaret covered her mouth, shaking her head in disbelief. "We were about to bury him alive," she muttered, horrified. Robert, pale but composed, barked out an order. "We need to get him out of here, now. Someone fetch water, blankets, anything." Oliver rushed toward the door, flinging it open. "I've already sent someone for the police, and an ambulance," he called back. His voice was hard, edged with barely controlled rage. "Victor isn't walking out of here." Victor, still collapsed on the cold floor, was sobbing hysterically. "No, no, this wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't mean for this." Evelyn's tear-filled gaze snapped toward him, her body trembling with fury. "You did this," she screamed. You tried to kill him. You buried him alive." Victor crawled backward, his face contorted in terror. I just wanted the house. I didn't mean, I thought he was dead." "You forged the death certificate," Oliver roared, striding toward him. "You poisoned him, and you left him to die in that box." Victor's voice broke into a high-pitched whimper. "I didn't know. I swear. I was scared. I couldn't stop once it started." Father Raphael stood, his voice firm and cold. "Your fear is no excuse for this evil, Victor. You have sinned against God and man. There is no forgiveness for what you've done." Victor sobbed harder, but no one paid him any pity. The sound of sirens echoed faintly in the distance, growing louder with each second. Relief washed over Evelyn, but her grip on Alexander never loosened. She could feel his weak heartbeat beneath her fingers. "Stay with me, Alexander. Stay with us. You're going to be okay." Mila wiped at her father's face with her small hands, her voice pure and trembling. "Papa, wake up. Please, wake up." Alexander's lips trembled, and a faint tear slipped down his pale cheek. "Mila, Evelyn, I heard everything." Evelyn gasped. You heard us?" He gave the slightest nod. "Dark, cold, but I heard you, Mila." Fresh sobs tore from Evelyn's throat. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I should have known. I should have stopped them." Alexander weakly shook his head. "Not your fault." The church doors burst open, and uniformed police officers stormed inside, followed by paramedics carrying stretchers and medical bags. Sheriff Miller, tall and imposing, took one look at the scene and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. "What the hell happened here?" he demanded, his sharp eyes scanning the villagers before landing on Victor. Oliver wasted no time. "Victor poisoned Alexander, faked his death, buried him alive. We have a confession, witnesses, everything." Sheriff Miller's face darkened. "You son of a bitch," he growled, signaling to his men. "Cuff him." Two officers lunged forward, dragging a screaming Victor to his feet. No, you don't understand," Victor shrieked. "It was a mistake." Sheriff Miller slammed him against the wall, snapping the cuffs on his wrists. "You buried a man alive, Victor. You're going away for a long, long time." Victor wailed, thrashing wildly. "Please, I didn't mean to." The sheriff shoved him down to the floor. "Save it for the judge." Meanwhile, the paramedics rushed to Alexander, carefully lifting him onto the stretcher. Evelyn and Mila stayed close, refusing to let go of his hand. "Severe dehydration, shock, but he's breathing," one paramedic muttered. "We need to get him to the hospital now." Evelyn nodded quickly, her face pale but determined. "We're coming with him." Mila's tear-streaked face peeked out from behind Evelyn. Papa needs me. I want to stay." Sheriff Miller glanced at them, his stern face softening. "Go with him. We'll handle the rest." As they wheeled Alexander out of the church, the villagers stepped aside, silent and ashamed. Margaret whispered, "We should have listened to the child." Sophia's eyes glistened with tears. "A mother's instinct, a child's love. They saved him." Outside, the early evening sky was painted in shades of red and orange. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and the siren wailed as it sped off toward the hospital. Sheriff Miller turned back to Victor, who was now whimpering on the floor. "You're going to answer for every second he's spent in that coffin," the sheriff growled. Oliver spat at Victor's feet. "I hope you rot." Father Raphael stood silently, his face pale, his hands clenched. "May God have mercy on you, because no one else will." Victor wept, but there was no redemption left for him. The truth was out. The nightmare was over. For Evelyn, Mila, and Alexander, the fight was far from finished, but they had survived, and now they would begin the long road toward healing, together. The ambulance raced through the streets, its siren piercing the night as Evelyn sat beside Alexander, clutching his weak hand. Mila lay curled against her father's side, her small hand resting on his chest as if anchoring him to life. Tears streamed silently down Evelyn's face as she watched the paramedics work feverishly to stabilize him. "His vitals are weak but holding," one paramedic murmured. "He's a fighter." Evelyn nodded, unable to speak. She leaned down, pressing a trembling kiss to Alexander's forehead. "You're safe now. We're with you. Stay with us," she whispered. Mila sniffled, looking up at her mother. "Mama, Papa will be okay, right?" Evelyn forced a shaky smile, wiping Mila's tears. "Yes, my love. He's going to be okay." By the time they reached St. Stephen's Hospital, a team of doctors was already waiting. Alexander was rushed inside, with Evelyn and Mila following closely behind. Nurses tried to guide them away, but Evelyn refused to let go. I stay until I know he's safe," she demanded, her voice breaking. The head doctor gave a solemn nod. "Stay close, but let us work." They watched helplessly as Alexander was connected to Ives and monitors, his pale body nearly lifeless on the hospital bed. Mila refused to leave his side, her little fingers entwined with his. Hours passed like a blur. Evelyn sat stiffly, her arms wrapped around Mila, staring at Alexander as if willing him to wake up. Her mind replayed every moment, every word Victor had spoken, every scream Mila had let out. She felt guilt gnawing at her soul. How could she not have seen it? How could she have let it come to this? Finally, the door creaked open. Sheriff Miller stepped inside, his hat in hand, his face grim. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "Victor's confessed to everything. He's in custody. Attempted murder, fraud, forgery. The charges will bury him." Evelyn's lips trembled. He said he just wanted the house, that he didn't mean to kill Alexander." Sheriff Miller scoffed. "That doesn't matter now. He made his choice. He'll face the full weight of the law." Evelyn nodded slowly, her gaze drifting back to Alexander. "I don't care about Victor. I just want my husband back." Miller's gaze softened. "He's lucky to have you, and that little girl. If it weren't for Mila, none of us would have known." Evelyn's throat tightened. She looked down at Mila, who had fallen asleep, her head resting gently against Alexander's chest. "She saved him. My baby saved him." The sheriff stood silently for a moment before clearing his throat. "I'll be outside if you need me. The doctor said he'll need time, but he's strong." When he left, Evelyn let herself cry, sobs shaking her thin frame. "You hear that, Alexander? You're strong. You come back to us." The night gave way to morning, golden sunlight filtering through the hospital windows. Evelyn was still at Alexander's side when his eyelids fluttered open. A weak whisper escaped his cracked lips. "Evelyn." Her breath caught in her throat. "I'm here. I'm right here." His eyes opened slowly, filled with pain, but also relief. "Mila?" "She's here, love," Evelyn whispered, shaking Mila gently awake. "Mila, Papa's awake." Mila stirred, blinking sleepily before her eyes lit up. "Papa," she cried, throwing herself against him. "Papa, I missed you." Alexander managed the faintest smile, his trembling hand lifting to stroke Mila's hair. "I missed you, both of you." Evelyn's tears flowed freely. "We thought we lost you. We almost did." Alexander's gaze darkened. I heard everything. I couldn't move. But I heard. Victor. He tried to kill me." Evelyn nodded, her hands clutching his. "I know. But he won't hurt you again. He's done." "I was so scared," Alexander whispered. "Trapped. Alone. But then I heard Mila calling me. You. Praying for me." Evelyn pressed her forehead to his. "We'll never be apart again, I swear." Mila beamed, her tiny hands cradling Alexander's face. "Papa, let's go home soon, please." Alexander chuckled weakly, tears falling down his cheeks. "Yes, sweetheart, we'll go home." There was a knock at the door. Father Raphael entered quietly, his face solemn but peaceful. "I came to see a miracle, and here you are." Alexander managed a small nod. "Father, thank you for believing." Father Raphael smiled gently. "It was Mila who believed. A child's faith is pure and strong. She saved you." Evelyn nodded, kissing Mila's head. "She did. She truly did." The priest placed a hand on Alexander's shoulder. "Rest now. Justice will be served. Victor will pay for what he's done." Alexander closed his eyes, his breathing slow but steady. "That's all I need to hear." Father Raphael turned to Evelyn. "When you're ready, the sheriff wants you to testify. The trial, it will be soon." Evelyn straightened, strength returning to her eyes. "I'll be there. We all will." Father Raphael nodded, giving Mila a gentle smile before turning to leave. "Rest, my children. You've earned it." As the door closed, Evelyn leaned back, holding both Alexander and Mila close. The nightmare was not over, but the darkest part had passed. For the first time in days, Evelyn allowed herself a small smile. They had survived, together, and soon. Victor would pay. 1 week later, the Castleton Provincial Court was packed. The entire village seemed to have gathered, their faces tense and expectant. The story of Alexander being buried alive had spread like wildfire, and now everyone wanted to witness justice. Murmurs filled the courtroom as Victor was led in, his hands shackled tightly, his face pale and drawn. The arrogant man who once stood over everyone now looked broken, his eyes sunken with fear. Evelyn sat in the front row, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Mila sat beside her, unusually quiet, her big eyes fixed on Victor. Alexander, though still weak, was determined to be there. Supported by a cane and Oliver at his side, he took his seat, his face pale but his gaze hard as stone. The judge entered, and the courtroom fell silent. The sound of the gavel echoed loudly. The court is now in session for the trial of Victor Ramirez, charged with attempted murder, fraud, forgery, and the unlawful burial of a living person. Alexander Herrera. Gasps rippled through the crowd at the formal reading of the charges. Victor flinched, his head hanging low. The prosecutor stood, his voice sharp and unforgiving. "Your Honor, the facts are simple. The defendant poisoned his cousin Alexander Herrera, forged a death certificate, bribed a corrupt doctor, and sought to gain financial control by burying him alive. Were it not for the extraordinary instinct of Mrs. Evelyn Herrera and their child Mila, this man would have succeeded." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Mila reached out, holding her mother's hand tightly. Alexander sat rigid, his jaw clenched. Victor's defense lawyer stood, but his voice lacked confidence. "Your Honor, my client acted out of desperation. There was no intent to kill, merely to frighten. Matters escalated beyond his control." The judge's cold gaze landed on Victor. "The difference between intent and action is meaningless when a man lies in a coffin, struggling to breathe." The prosecutor continued, laying out every piece of evidence. Victor's confession, the forged documents, the forensic report from Dr. Lucas, and the testimony of witnesses like Oliver and Sophia. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. "The victim wishes to address the court," the prosecutor announced. The judge nodded. "Mr. Herrera, you may speak." With Oliver's support, Alexander rose slowly. The courtroom was dead silent as he gripped his cane, standing tall despite the weakness in his legs. He turned to face Victor, his voice rough but filled with steel. "Victor, I don't hate you," Alexander began, his words stunning the room into deeper silence. "But I despise what you did. You betrayed your own blood. You buried me alive for a house, for money." Victor whimpered, shaking his head. "I didn't mean—" "Be silent," the judge snapped. Alexander took a breath. "Lying in that coffin, I heard everything. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. But I heard my wife, my daughter. I heard you trying to take everything from me, even my life." Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes as she listened. Mila clung to her father's arm. "You left me to die, Victor. But Mila, my little girl, she saved me. Her love, my wife's love, pulled me back." Alexander's voice cracked, but he continued. "You don't deserve forgiveness. You deserve to rot in a cell for the rest of your life." Victor collapsed to his knees, sobbing. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." But no one felt pity for him. The judge's face was stone. "The court has heard enough. It is clear the defendant acted with malice and greed, attempting one of the most heinous crimes imaginable, burying a man alive." The gavel slammed down. "Victor Ramirez is hereby sentenced to 25 years in prison. May justice be served." Cheers erupted from the villagers. Margaret wiped tears from her eyes, while Sophia clutched her rosary, whispering a prayer of thanks. Victor was dragged out of the courtroom, his cries for mercy echoing uselessly through the chamber. Evelyn exhaled slowly, gripping Alexander's hand. "It's over. It's finally over." Oliver leaned in, smiling. You did it. You both did. Mila looked up at her father. Papa, can we go home now? Alexander smiled for the first time in days. Yes, my little angel, we're going home. The judge's voice called out once more. Court adjourned. As the villagers filed out, many paused to touch Alexander's shoulder or squeeze Evelyn's hand, offering words of support and admiration. They knew now it was love, faith, and the bravery of a child that had saved a man from the grave. Outside the courthouse, the sun was shining, the sky impossibly blue. For the first time in weeks, Evelyn felt as if she could breathe again. She looked at Alexander and Mila, her family, and knew they had survived the worst. Let's go home, Evelyn whispered. Alexander nodded, tears shining in his eyes. Together, always. The golden rays of the afternoon sun bathed the Herrera home in soft light as Alexander stood on the front porch, leaning heavily on his cane. His eyes scanned the familiar fields stretching beyond the horizon, the breeze gently rustling the grass. The air smelled of home, fresh, clean, full of life. For the first time in weeks, a sense of peace washed over him. Behind him, Evelyn stepped out quietly, her face lit by the sunlight. She watched Alexander for a moment, seeing the strength slowly return to the man she thought she had lost forever. Mila's laughter echoed from the yard where she chased butterflies, her little feet kicking up puffs of dust as she ran. Alexander turned his head, catching Evelyn's gaze. A faint smile tugged at his lips. We're really home, he whispered, his voice still hoarse but steady. Evelyn nodded, blinking back tears. Yes, home. She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. We made it, Alexander. Alexander took a shaky breath, his eyes misting. There were moments inside that coffin where I thought I'd never see this place again. I thought I'd never see Mila, never see you. Evelyn's voice trembled as she spoke. I almost lost you. We almost lost everything. But Mila, she knew. She never stopped believing. They both turned to look at their daughter. Mila was now sitting in the grass, weaving a flower crown, her face serene and full of light. She looked up and saw her parents watching, waving happily. Mama, Papa, look, I'm making this for you. Alexander smiled, wiping a tear from his cheek. Our little angel, she saved me. Evelyn leaned against him. She saved us both. For a moment, they stood there in silence, simply breathing, simply existing, together. The pain, the terror, the betrayal, it all seemed distant now, a dark cloud they had finally outrun. A car pulled up near the house. Oliver stepped out, smiling as he approached. Sorry to interrupt your peace, but I just wanted to check on you. Alexander grinned weakly. You've been there every step, Oliver. You're family now. Oliver chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. Well, I wasn't going to let Victor get away with it, and I just wanted to see you standing on your own 2 feet. I'm getting there, Alexander nodded. One day at a time. Oliver's smile faded slightly. The trial, it shook the whole town. People still talk about it, about what Victor did. No one saw it coming. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Greed makes monsters out of men. Oliver nodded. The sheriff said Victor's already been transferred to state prison. 25 years. He won't be coming back. Alexander sighed, his grip tightening around Evelyn's hand. Good. Let him rot. He deserves every second. Mila ran up, holding her flower crown high. "Papa, Mama, I made this for you." Evelyn knelt, tears glistening in her eyes as she helped Mila place the crown on Alexander's head. "There, now you're our king," she whispered. Alexander chuckled softly. "I don't need a crown, Mila. I have everything I ever wanted right here." Mila giggled, throwing her arms around both her parents. "We're a family. Right, Papa? No one can ever take us apart." Alexander kissed her forehead, his voice thick with emotion. "Never, my love. We're together. Always." They sat together on the porch as the sun dipped lower, casting the world in a golden glow. Birds sang in the trees, and the world felt whole again. Evelyn rested her head on Alexander's shoulder. "I'll never forget what we went through, but maybe it made us stronger." Alexander nodded slowly. "It did. It showed us what really matters. Love, family, the people who fight for you when you can't fight for yourself." Mila beamed, her small hand gripping Alexander's. "And we'll always fight for each other, right?" "Yes, Mila." Evelyn smiled, pressing a kiss to her daughter's head. "Always." They sat there long after the sun had set, wrapped in each other's warmth, knowing that no matter what came next, they had already faced the worst, and won. The nightmare was over, justice had been served, and love had saved them all. Some stories remind us the truth always comes out, no matter how deeply it's buried. What would you do in such a situation? Share your thoughts in the comments, and tell us, where are you watching from? We'd love to know. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next story.